webinar, we are going to discuss about what is VO2 max, how do we calculate it, what are the methods that are available to calculate, what are the variables that we measure, how do we interpret the results, and what are the benefits and limitations of doing the direct and indirect testing. So as everybody, all of you know that VO2 max test is known as maximal oxygen consumption, maximal oxygen uptake, peak oxygen uptake, or maximal aerobic capacity. By definition, it is the maximum rate of oxygen consumption which is measured during incremental exercise. So it's not just one steady state exercise that somebody is doing, it has to be an incremental level of exercise, and at that maximum exercise, whatever oxygen is being consumed is termed as VO2 max. It is usually tested on treadmill and sometimes on cycle. So if we talk about it in the West, it is more on the cycle that they give preference to, while in India and most of the other countries, we do it on the treadmill. At times, it could also be done on the field. The measurement unit is liters per minute, which is the absolute measurement. Relative measurement is more commonly used for comparing results and everything, which is milligram per kg per minute. So if you have three people whose VO2 max are same, the absolute values, if you could divide them by their weight, you will know their relative value, and that will give you more more precise way of comparing their VO2 values, and you'll know who will perform better amongst those three. VO2 max reflects the capacity of heart, lungs. It also reflects blood's capacity to deliver oxygen to the muscles and the muscles' capacity to utilize it. So if you can see, it is entire system of the body which is responsible for getting you a VO2 max value, and not just one. So if everybody may have heard about this equation, which is known as Fick's equation, which is cardiac output into arteriovenous oxygen difference. So when we talk cardiac output is the amount of blood that could be circulated through your body in 1 minute by your heart's pumping. While arteriovenous oxygen difference is, for example, there is 100 ml of blood going in the arteries and it's reaching to the muscle. How much is your muscle able to use it? So out of 100, if it is taking 60 ml and 40 ml is returning back in the venous circulation, that 60 ml is the arteriovenous oxygen difference. So multiplication of these two gives you the VO2 max value. So determinants of VO2 max value are divided in two parts. One is the delivery system and one is the utilization. So the delivery is dependent on how well the cardiac output is, how well the pulmonary diffusion capacity is, how nicely the oxygen is being carried by the hemoglobins molecules, and how well the muscle capillary density is developed. While it comes to utilization, the amount of lean muscle mass. So if the mass is less, muscle mass is less, um, the end organ is smaller in size, so the utilization will be less. Muscle fiber type. The slow twitch muscle fibers are more related to the endurance performance. So higher the number of slow twitch fibers, better the utilization. Size of mitochondria and activity of oxidative enzymes. So all of it together lead to better values of VO2 max. Now, what are the factors that affect to VO2 max? As age and gender are the most common and basically known factors which can lead to different values of VO2. So if you could see in the graph, as we born and as we grow older, so till 20 years of age, the VO2 max values keep rising, and after 20 years, there is slow and steady decline. There is a huge difference between male and female VO2 max values. There could be 15 to 30% difference between male and female values. Of course, depending on the fitness and training levels, the VO2 max values will be changing. And again, body size and composition. So more muscular you are tend to have higher VO2 max values. What are all factors that could affect. So in that, moving on, genetics plays very important role in uh, values of VO2 max, and it is something that we could all not change. So it is known that Kenya and Ethiopia, these countries and these places have the all the world highest levels of runners. They are all coming from this area. That is all due to their genetics. Of course, the training and performance and all other factors also contribute to it. Um, Another factor which affects the VO2 max value is the altitude. So it is known that as you go on the higher altitude, the pressure of oxygen is less, and it takes, if the people are living in that area, it stimulates the erythropoiesis, and that's why it is known that if people are living there at the high altitudes and training at the sea level, which gives you better values of VO2 max. Now if you see all these people in the picture, they are all from Ladakh, and they are all very very well, they are very competitive runners, and these people had values of VO2 max above 70, which is very commendable, and it may reach to world class levels if they train even more and well. Exercise mode and temperature is also factors which affect VO2 max. So non-weight bearing exercises have lower VO2 max values, weight bearing exercises have higher values. Action of the ventilatory muscle is a new thing which is coming up, and there are a lot of runners and elite athletes which go on for ventilatory muscle training, inspiratory muscle training, and they wear those special masks to train those muscles to improve the performance. Now, VO2 max values, they determine the aerobic fitness levels, and for average untrained person, so for any sedentary male or female, the values range around 35 to 40. While if you see world class athletes, it goes up to 75 and 80 or even 85. So this is the chart, and there are a lot of normative data available depending on the country or depending on the age and other factors also that you could refer, but this is the general chart which I have put for your reference. So for any sedentary person, the values will be lying somewhere here. This is for world-class athletes. So if you see, their values are amazingly high. They are about 90 for male, and as you see the difference between male and female, the values for female are also about 70, 78. Now this is very important slide because there are many other factors also which contribute to endurance performance. So VO2 max testing is one of the very important helpful way to find out the performance, but exercise economy or efficiency, sustainable percentage VO2 max, lactate threshold, and velocity or power which is there at the VO2 max, these all contribute to the endurance performance. There are various measurement techniques for VO2 max. So there is direct, where we use the mask and everything, which I'm going to talk in detail about. There is indirect, where we do a lot of testing. And there is estimation, where there is no testing is done, but based on certain values, it is just estimated what will be a VO2 max for that person. Direct testing involves a lot of sophisticated equipment. So if you can see in this picture, these are various equipment which are used across the world, and they look all fancy, and it looks sophisticated. So there are before we start with this, we have to look for any contraindication for exercise testing. So the first step for doing a VO2 max test is checking for contraindications. So these all are contraindications similar we have in for any maximal testing. So those have to be ruled out. Now, if we begin a process of VO2 max testing, suppose at our department, this is how we go about it. So first is to take the basic details of age, height, and weight. These are the important parts because this we have to actually, if you can see, this is the computer behind where we do the data entry for it, and it has the software for VO2 max testing. So it takes a person's height, it takes a person's weight, and also the age, exact date of birth and everything, so to reflect and correlate the values. History about sports or medical conditions. So one important aspect I would want to mention is VO2 max testing is not just limited to the sports or athletes. It is nowadays, and recently, I think in last decade, it has been nicely used for patients who have cardiac or pulmonary conditions, patients who have cancer. So they're based on the values of VO2 and other values, very important calls are taken whether they need heart transplant or not, whether what is their mortality levels or morbidity levels of a particular surgery. So that is why we could do the testing for both the population. It's kind of extreme of the health that we could look after. So if we are seeing a sports athlete, we need to know their recent training levels, what sports they are part of, and what kind of training that they do. If, of course, there is a patient, we'll do a detailed medical condition and other histories. Important to know their medicines, because if there are certain medicines that change their heart rate or blood pressure, that need to be noted down. If there are any particular symptoms that they experience at rest or during any kind of training, they also need to be looked after. And if we are seeing athletes of younger age, we have at times seen that they have performance pressure, and because of that, at times they complain of breathlessness or any kind of headache during the training or unusual symptoms. But those also need to be noted down and should be done checked under caution. Taking informed consent is very important because we are doing a maximal test, and each maximum test has its a risk of unfortunate event. That's why it is important to take the consent. Now, if you see this picture, this is exactly where I am sitting. Um, Before starting the test, it is important to decide whether we are going to test the person on treadmill or cycle. So if there is a cyclist who is coming for a test, he would prefer to do it on cycle, and it is also a little bit training specific. So we should go for a cycle protocol. If a person is runner or they have not done any kind of training or anything, can be taken on the treadmill. There are different kind of protocols which are available, step or ramp. Most of the time treadmill protocols are the step protocols, and most of the cycle protocols could be ramp ones. um, at our center, we use the Bruce protocol, which is incremental step protocol, and it is very standardized across the world. So if you know a person did 9 minutes 15 seconds exercise on a Bruce protocol, that is a standard frame. So then if somebody knows a Bruce protocol, listening to that values, they will understand what would be the estimated fitness level of that person is. There are a lot of running protocols available, and it is a bit controversial across the world whether there should runners should do a running protocol or not. But research till now have demonstrated that Bruce protocol gets the maximum VO2 max values for runners. So even if the runners they feel that, oh, running protocol they could do better, they could give their better effort, but the values of VO2 they come higher when they are doing Bruce protocol. So now after taking all those details, this is how we have to set up the machine. So this is the bag in which we have all these parts. So just to show you, this is the main device which usually sits on the shoulder of a person. Um, this is the this is the sensor, so through which a person inhales and exhales. It fits on this mask. It's like this, and a mask is tightly fitting on a person's face so that there is no air leak, as you can see in the diagram. So the idea is to analyze the volume of air that has been inhaled and exhaled during the test at the maximum test, and the concentration of oxygen and CO2 that has been utilized during the test. Uh, Now there are a few steps that we follow while we are doing the testing. So I'll show you one by one. So in this image, it may appear that I'm scolding him, but I'm just talking to him and I'm explaining the test protocol, that what is expected from him and what is his indication to stop. So as you can see, this mask is tightly fitting and we don't want them to talk when they are doing the test. So usually we communicate in sign language. So it is important to clear that from the beginning, that what is their indication for us to stop the test, so that we can easily respond in a way. Uh, Holding or not holding is also very important. So once the person is explained all that, in after fitting this machine, they are sitting in the chair for a while. We take their resting data, and then when they are ready to start the treadmill, we put the harness behind. If you can see, there's a rope hanging behind, and depending on their ability to walk on the treadmill, so most of the time we prefer that they do not hold the bar and they walk without holding it, because there's a huge difference also in the VO2 max values when somebody holds it and somebody doesn't take support. Um, After this preparation, there are few parameters that we note down. So we take a person's heart rate, blood pressure, and RP at rest. As you could see in the previous slide, we also take the ECG, continuous ECG monitoring. And these all things are in addition to what we see in the machine. So after we fix this VO2 max machine, there are few things that we see in the main screen, and in addition to that, we take all these data at rest and during each stage of the test. So for any test, adequate warm-up is required. So I'll just play this video. So as you could see, even if it is an athlete, earlier part of the test should have some amount of warm-up, and that's how it starts. Now, while we are doing the tests, if we are talking about a Bruce protocol, every 3 minutes, the stage, the speed and the inclination of the treadmill is going to rise, and the person is explained to give their maximum effort. So, till the time they tell us that they are tired or they want to stop or they are having the maximum exertion during that effort, that is when we stop the test. So there are few criteria based on which we terminate the test. One of which, the most important, is when patients suggest us or the subject or the athletes tell us to stop. Second is when we see the heart rate is reaching predicted maximum values, but that's not the criteria to stop. We just keep an eye onto these. So these are the indicators which let us know that, okay, now the person is reaching their maximal values and they may stop anytime. Again, we keep a close eyes on the ARIA values, and as we take the Borg scale, that is another indication. So when a person is almost on their maximal efforts, if they are good trained athletes, they may be running, and depending on their training levels, person may be running at this intensity or they may be running like him. So he is Jinson Johnson. He is India's best runner. He's got gold medals into 800-meter running, and we've done the testing on him. So you could see how important this is to have the harness on him, because they are running at a very high speed, and this treadmill can go up to speed of 20, 30 kilometers. Of course, in the test it won't go, but they would be going at speed of 60, 16 kilometers per hour also at the running test. So for him, we use the running protocol. If you would want to see the video again, that he is on the flat treadmill, he is running, and it is very high speed. So at this time, it is important to keep an eye on all these values which I mentioned, to know that they are about to reach the exertion. So criteria to terminate the test, there are plenty of them. There are 10 to 12 listed, but I have put down 4 most important criteria. One is the maximal exertion levels, which are 19 to 20, or the person they want to stop. Any failure of heart rate or VO2 max, VO2 values to rise with increasing workload. So if it is an incremental test and your stage is progress, but these values are not showing any increase, then that it should worry you. Any noticeable change in the heart rate rhythm or ECG, or any onset of angina or angina-like symptoms. Those are the criteria when we would like to terminate the test. Now, after completion of the test, effective cool down of 3 to 5 minutes, depending on their need, is very important, and the person is monitored for a while, and the recovery data is also continuously taken. I think before we move on to the next part, we would like to take question and answer, and we have Dr. Contractor sitting over here. So give me a moment.
I can remove that. Okay, so are there any questions? Let's try and look at the panel. Hang on one second. Okay, so Ashirwad asks what's called a practical question. He says, do you go for maximal testing or stop at the end of the third stage of Bruce protocol while testing for non-athletic individuals and the elderly? So the ideal thing whenever you're doing a max test for somebody, as the name suggests, it should be a maximum test. So we call it maximum voluntary effort. So normally when we do stress tests, in these clinical settings also or many labs and hospitals, what they end up doing is they stop them at a predicted max. That's not correct because that's just a predicted max. Everybody's max heart rate is not going to be exactly 220 minus age, correct? So we need to really go to their max. It's a good formula. Most people you find will be within 5-10 beats below or above the predicted. But ideally, you should let them go till their max. At any time the person wants to stop, then we stop. Okay, remember that the person is totally in charge of when they want to stop for whatever reason. Also, if you see something wrong on your screen, especially on the heart rate data, the ECG data, then yes, then you can stop the test. But otherwise, in general, we let them go till the time that they can move on. Okay. Okay. Another question is, what are the different protocols used apart from Bruce? So there is a Norton protocol, which is used a lot in clinical settings. There is a Balke protocol, which is used a lot, and people have different ramp protocols. So one of the criticisms of Bruce is that it jumps up very, very quickly. You straight away start with 10% and then goes to 12, 14, and that's one of the criticisms. But in an athletic population, they normally can handle it. Or you go by a ramp protocol, which you can even make up, which can be on a cycle or which can be on a bike. So you keep on grading up a certain number of watts or a certain number of speed and inclination ever so often. Okay, so these are some of the common protocols that are used. Which protocol is better? The Bruce protocol is the most commonly used protocol. Let's put it that way. And because it's the most commonly used, in terms of comparisons and discussions, it just becomes easier to do. Okay. Let's see, Jenny, maybe you should answer some of the questions now. Thank you.
How important it is? How important is this test considered in any high-risk surgery like transplant? I would say this is a new thing which has not been established, at least in India, to do it as a routine practice, but it is usually a surgeon's call. And at times, so we have three to four patients that we have tested before the cardiomyopathy patients to take a call onto their heart transplant surgery. And when we did these tests, we found that they are still having some reserve. Their functional capacity is good. The VO2 max values and lactate threshold values were good.
and the doctors could reschedule they could reschedule the test again after year and year. We could repeat it, and it has been postponed for a while.
So I'll just add to that. Typically for cardiac transplants, okay, VO2 max analysis has shown to be or is being part of the protocol is almost mandatory. And I'll explain why. Because in these heart failure patients, there's something called a Weber classification. Their VO2 is lower. So if somebody's VO2 max is very, very low, then the person's not a candidate for a heart transplant because they feel this person's not going to have a great long-term result. Paradoxically, if the VO2 max is quite high, then they feel that the person is actually good enough to carry on their current heart and they don't need a transplant, which is what Jenny just mentioned, that we have tested a few people who've been on the list, but because they did so well on the test, they were told that, you know what, you're doing quite well. You got a VO2 of 18, 20, etc. We can hold off on the transplant. So that's how it works. Somebody asked that, can you push a client beyond his max heart rate even when he has an RPE of 7? The question is yes. Sorry, the answer is yes. If they can carry on and they are not completely fatigued, RPE is 7, you don't need to stop just because the heart rate max is reached. Another question was, which cardiac conditions are contraindications for testing? I know Jenny had a slide on contraindications. Have you done that yet?
Yes.
We finished that slide?
We finished that slide.
So typically, one of the main things is if somebody has got active angina, even before getting on, you would never do a max test. If somebody's got, critical aortic stenosis, you're not going to do a test like this. Somebody has got infection, fever, even though other things may be fine, you don't do it on that time. Okay? Jenny, you want to take some of that?
Can this test be done on pregnant women? If yes, in which trimester it is okay to carry out, and in what precautions to be taken for the same? I think so. You are the better person to answer.
No, so my first question is, why would you want to do it on a pregnant woman? Correct. It's not a question of can it be done. What is the benefit that you are hoping to get by doing a VO2 max on a pregnant woman? So that is the question. And as I don't see a reason why you would do a maximum test for a pregnant lady. And the first trimester tends to be the one where, pregnancy is just getting set in a manner of speaking. So unless there's a real pressing indication, which I can't think of any, I would not want to do a max test on a lady in the first trimester or in the last. It just leaves the middle. But again, the question is, why do you want to do it? Okay. There was a question that Ronak asked right in the beginning. Let's see if we can answer that. He says, how will you differentiate between heart, lung, muscle and blood functioning capacity if we see the VO2 max lower than normal? So Ronak, just based on a VO2 max, just the value, it might be hard to distinguish as to what's the reason for the low functional capacity. Now remember, when you are the person actually performing the test, you can get a lot of indication because the person might be telling you, I'm stopping because my legs are hurting, knees hurting, stuff like that. So you might get some indication. A second important point, which may not be your direct question, but I think is relevant to answer, is that a lot of people feel that they fatigue because of their lungs. So you standardly hear people say, oh, my lungs gave way, correct? And the truth of the matter is that your lungs generally never give way. How do we know that? Because before we start the test, we do what's called a maximum voluntary ventilation, which really means the maximum amount of air that you can move in and out of your lungs in 1 minute. So we make them hyperventilate. We don't do it for a whole minute, otherwise they'll hyperventilate and they'll just probably fall down and Jenny won't be happy. But we normally do it for 6 or 12 seconds and we extrapolate. So let's say that the MVV in these conditions is say 180 liters, right? I'm just making up a number. When a person's at max and when we even push them to max, we usually find that they reach only somewhere between 70 to 75% of this max, which means that it's not their lungs which gave way. They still had what's called a breathing reserve. The breathing reserve is the number between the max they achieved on the test and the max that they achieved before the test while they were just in a simulating condition. Okay. So only very, very high level athletes or people with pulmonary problems where they truly have obstructive disease ever get a breathing reserve which is almost close to zero. So you never see that. So this also is a good test clinically to identify between cardiac causes of breathlessness and pulmonary causes of breathlessness. Okay.
There is a question for patients with lung affection, do we prefer cycle or treadmill while testing? Well, the answer is we don't have to choose it based on the lung problem. We should choose it based on the person's preference of whether they are used to do cycle or treadmill or not. And if we find that the people have lower capacities, we could go for a modified Bruce protocol, or at times we could take the Norton protocol for testing.
Somebody just asked modified Bruce versus Bruce. So basically, modified Bruce is for people who are very deconditioned. Okay, so the normal Bruce protocol starts at 1.7 miles per hour. Okay, I'm using miles, not kilometer. Starts at 1.7 miles per hour at 10% grade. Modified Bruce starts at 1.7 miles per hour and 0%. Stage 1. Stage 2 is again 1.7 miles per hour and 5%. And stage 3 of modified Bruce is 1.7 miles an hour and 10%, which is like the stage 1 of regular Bruce. So it takes 6 minutes of modified Bruce to get you up to the first stage of regular Bruce. Okay.
So there's one question for you.
Yeah.
When the patient is performing in high stage of Bruce, he is present with some abnormal ECG changes. How can we stop the treadmill? Shall we go gradually reduce the speed or stop all of a sudden?
Okay, so good question. Do you stop gradually or you stop all of a sudden? So unless you're seeing, like say, a ventricular tachycardia out of control or something like that, even when we say stop immediately, it could be stopped within say 3 seconds. Right? Immediately does not have to mean absolute immediate. You can just slow down in 3 or 4 seconds stop. That's always better, less chance of somebody falling. So under very rare circumstances, unless the person looks like they are falling off the treadmill, they are suddenly clutching their chest and they need to be removed. So rarely would I do a absolute flat stop from a high speed. Okay, I would usually slow it down and stop. Maybe we take 2 more questions and then you can carry on speaking. Because I think some of the questions on RER which you're going to cover later. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions, Jenny?
I'm just going through them. There's a question how VO2 max testing is done on the field. So it's a good question because So usually we have this monitor which is specially designed to be used for the field. So the person wears the similar gadget as they were prepared in, and there is a long antenna which connects with this, and this can be taken in the field. And usually the choice of test is based on the person who is referred them for testing. Usually it is a shuttle run test that we do. That's a beep test that can be performed. At times, people do perform functional testing also for this.
Okay, so I think, Jenny, you should carry on. And the meeting I had later has been postponed, so I could come back later for questions as well. Okay, so I'll see you all.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for all your questions. I think we'll have to move on and we'll see if we have time in the later part. We'll again take up the questions again.
Okay, so coming on to interpretation of parameters and test results. So if you are done with a VO2 max testing and you want to see that how the results look like, then this is what I would want to answer it with. So it has multiple parameters and we usually have a 13-page report, okay? So this is just two of them, and there are all those values that we analyze before preparing to the medical findings and reports. But because this is too much, and I think if I describe all of it, you will all sleep and I may also get tired. So I'll stick to most important 4 to 5 parameters that we look at. So what the report has is time and workload. So it shows the time at anaerobic threshold, it shows the time at VO2 max, it shows the resting values, and it shows the recovery values. So there would be 4 times where all these values will be captured. So that we could see in the report. Heart rate, we could see VO2 max and peak values. We could see VCO2 values, V upon VO2, V upon VCO2. RER, that is respiratory exchange ratio, that is VCO2 divided by VO2. That's what respiratory exchange ratio means. Anaerobic or lactic threshold. Now, when we see in the report, as you could see, there are 4 columns side by side. One is at the rest. VT1 suggests the anaerobic threshold, or when we have decided where the anaerobic threshold is. At that time, what were all the values? Then VO2 peak or VO2 max values, recovery values, and the rightmost is the expected value or predicted value for that person. So if you see for this report, the top graph shows the Bruce protocol. I don't know if you all can see my cursor moving. So it's showing the step protocol, which we did for the person, and the time at which the VO2 max was reached was 21 minutes and 02 seconds. Now in that, it also included 3 minutes of resting time. So usually if you remove that, it comes to 18 minutes. So a person did 18 minutes on Bruce protocol. The workload or the speed at that time was 8.8 kilometers per hour, and elevation was 20%, which is very high grade inclination and high speed. The absolute values of VO2 were 3.69 liters per minute, and it is 140% of his predicted value, the person's predicted value. The relative VO2 values were 76. So for that person, the predicted value was around 56 or something, and that person achieved 76 milligram per minute per kg of VO2. So this is all we look. And in the last row, if you all could see, it is heart rate, which is mentioned 181. So for this person, though they gave the maximum effort, though they did the VO2 max, we may have got the graph of plateau. Their predicted heart rate was 197, if you could see in the right bottom, but they could achieve only 181 as the maximum heart rate. So there is a variability of the achieved heart rate versus what we predict based on their age, but that should not be the criteria to stop the test. Now, when we see the VO2 max graph, so this is the graph which we get to see as it is from the bottom. If you could see left side, the orangish zone is the resting value. As the exercise is progressing, the graph is slowly moving on. The consumed VO2 amount is going up and up. And as there is, if you could see the red arrow which I have marked horizontally, is the time when with the incremental exercise also the VO2 max values remain the same, and then after the test was terminated, and the pink zone is the recovery time where the graph is coming down. So this horizontal part is called as plateau, because with the increasing amount of exercise, the values of VO2 are not increasing, they are remaining almost steady, and that's why it's called VO2 max. Now, if it was not remaining like that and it was going up and abruptly it was abruptly they could not go beyond that, and when the test was stopped, the abrupt drop down of the VO2 value, then it is called as VO2 peak. So now it's more of a terminology which we give, that whether it was VO2 peak or VO2 max. The important part to understand about is that if a person has not reached the plateau, their VO2 max values may have gone much higher or may have remained the same. So that time we don't know if the person actually achieved their maximum or not. So that's when the terminology VO2 max and VO2 peak come in. So VO2 peak is they reach the peak, but you don't know if there is something lying higher than that or not. But if the max is maximum, so there is nothing more than that that person has. Okay, now when yeah, so this is what I had explained you looking at that graph. Now if a person has reached suppose a peak, and if you want to make sure was that the maximum for the person, there are other parameters which we could look at. So another the one thing which we look at is attainment of the age predicted maximal heart rate. So whether the heart rate reached more than 90% of its predicted max value or not. Second is RER value, if they were above 1.15 or not. If we are doing simultaneous blood lactate measurements, which we could, but it's better to do it on the cycle rather than on a treadmill. So then if the values reach beyond 8 millimole or not. And last thing is if the RP values were above 18 or not. So if you have one or two parameters also positive with this, then you could assume that the person had given their maximum effort and they had all out effort and you got the VO2 max value. This is another important parameter which we look at, which is known as lactate threshold. It is usually estimated by the machine itself, and there are various graphs to look at when we want to validate it if it is the right value or not. The lactate threshold is the point where the lactate production is more than the usage of lactate. So what happens is when we are at rest, there is some amount of lactate production. When we are doing sub-maximal exercise or exercise at suppose 40 to 50% of our VO2 max, the utilization of lactate and the production of lactate is somewhat balanced. So there is a linear increase in the lactate value, but there comes a point beyond which the values shoot up all of a sudden. So if you could see in the graph, the blue zone is showing there is a linear increase in the lactate value, and there comes a point after which the aerobic system of your body is not able to um, fulfill the demands which are placed by the body for oxygen, and your anaerobic system is coming up to help, and that's when your lactate levels are starting to rise. So this is an important aspect to predict a performance of a person, or even if there are two people whose VO2 max values are same, but one person's lactate threshold is much later than the other, then that person's performance will be better. So how do we see this lactate value or lactate threshold in a report? So we see at what time or at what workload the lactate value was reached. Another thing that we could look at is at what percentage of VO2 max the lactate values were, lactate threshold was reached. So this is the graph that we see on the machine, that if you see this line, there was a linear increase in the lactate, and there was a point after which the slope of the graph increased. So that's the point where the lactate threshold was reached. Now, is there any difference between the trained and untrained person's lactate threshold? Yes. So if lesser the training, lactate threshold is reached earlier. Means you get tired very soon, just in a layman's language, if you have to say. And with training, it could be improved and it could be delayed. So if you see the blue graph, the lactate threshold was reached at 10 kilometers per hour of the speed. And after training, that could be pushed at 11.8 kilometers per hour of the speed. Now, this is how overall we see a performance evaluation graph of a person after seeing all those parameters that it has been rated between poor to excellent in different components. So if a person's VO2 max value is excellent, but the lactate threshold is lower, it means that person needs more training in that zone. So these all graphs are very useful to see the exact values, and the coaches and the therapists, they can take a call based on these values that how do we plan an exercise program for this person to get better performance. It also gives us a zone, heart rate zone values. So as you all will be aware, there are 5 ways the heart rate zones are divided. There is blue, green, yellow, orange, and red zone. And for endurance training or to improve a to push a lactate threshold of a person behind, usually the trainings are given at C and D zones, and to improve a person's VO2 max or high intensity training or improvise overall performance, it is given in D and E zones. So this is how when we are doing a VO2 max value, because it is live monitoring about everything, it will give specific values of heart rate at which the training could be done. Now, what are the benefits of this direct testing? That it gives real-time oxygen and CO2 analysis. So at throughout the test, at any point of time, we could see what was the oxygen consumption at particular speed or particular time of a test. Because for certain athletes or certain kind of sports or certain kind of running, if you want to see what was the economy of that run or what was the oxygen utilization at certain speed of running, that we could see in the report. It is very accurate and it has high validity. I think it is 99 point some digits validity and reliability. It could be used on the field. Not all the VO2 max testing device has this facility, but our device has a field test monitoring. VO2 max is the best predictor of performance in heterogeneous different populations. You could do the same test and you could compare the results. Now, what are the limitations of direct testing? One, the test is expensive. Two, it is time consuming. It takes around 45 minutes to 1 hour's time, even after you have a good expertise to start and finish the test. So that much time consuming it is. It needs expertise. So I would like to put one comment onto it. It took around 15 to 18 wrong tests before I could do the first right test. So I remember that how much I had to go trying and learning from Dr. Contractor before I could get it right. And yeah, so that's how the expertise is needed. It cannot be done outdoor like most of the other units. They are not having the facility that you could do it on the field. Now, somebody had asked a question about indirect measurements of VO2. So indirect measurement is where we are you're not using these kind of machines, but we are doing certain tests which has been already having some predicted formulas, so that we can put just values of measurements in that, whatever we could take, and it will give us an estimated value of VO2. So indirect testings are based on formulas. Some of the interesting tests are based on questionnaires, which are using, I think, physical activity readiness questionnaires kind of tools. Then it could use tests which there are various tests available. So there are few field tests, there are treadmill tests, cycle and step protocols also, which has a derived formula for VO2 max, which has been established with good validity and reliability. Um, it has different reliability and accuracy, but not as accurate as direct testing. That is true. So these are few tests which I have listed: 1.5 mile run test, Bruce treadmill test. So if you don't have this device, but you are doing a Bruce protocol, so then for each stage that one could finish, and if you put a person's value of age and and male and female gender and heart rate, then it gives you a predicted VO2 max Then there is 20-meter shuttle run test. So beep test is a very standard test amongst athletes. It is very well known also. So again, which stage and lap you are finishing, based on that, there are predicted VO2 max values. Then Storer maximal bicycle test. So for all these, there are formulas. So any one of you, if you want to know, please reach out to me. I can share the details of these tests and predicted formulas along with the reliability values. Now there are few submaximal tests. This was very interesting for me also, that few submaximal tests also have got a fair amount of reliability between 75 to 80%. And if one could do that, then you can have an estimated value. So one is 6-minute walk test, Rockport 1 mile walk test, which could be done outside as well as on the treadmill, Cooper 12-minute jog test, and Brigham Young University jog test. There are few ways we could do estimation of VO2. Now, in this, you don't have to do any kind of testing. There are direct formulas about measuring the resting heart rate or doing heart rate measurement at any kind of activity, and it just estimates. This is a very interesting part because I think this is the time where everybody uses smartwatch, and most of the athletes and sports people also have it. I also have one. So people like to know all these values, right? So estimates based on the gender, age, body weight, walking pace. So suppose if I went for a walk, I could finish 1 mile. It will just see that how much time I took to finish 1 mile and what was my heart rate at that time. And based on that, it will just estimate the values of VO2 max. So there are few devices which I have listed which already have these features in it. Now, if you could see the graph, this is my data about the VO2 max, and I just put it to show you that it has some good amount of reliability, because if you see the right side graph, there is a dip in the VO2 max in around November and December time. It was the time when I had got fracture and I was in the wheelchair and I couldn't move around much. So I think at that time it just showed a little bit decline in my VO2 max. But as you could see, the values have not changed, like from 44 to it went up to 42 only. So I would really want to now check that has it really come to 44 or not. Somebody needs to do VO2 max testing for me, and we could compare those data that how much accurate is it or not. Limitations of these estimated or indirect tests. One is low reliability because it is varying between 68% to 88%. That's the maximum reliability we could get for estimation of VO2 max. It cannot estimate the lactate threshold, and it cannot give values about the other parameters of VO2. Also, these all estimated or indirect ways of testing have a lot of assumptions made. There are a lot of linear relationship which are thought about, and based on that the values are predicted. And that is when, if the kind of exercise or the intensity of exercise is varied too much, then the reliability even goes further down. Now, to summarize that how the VO2 max direct testing could be useful is, one is it is the single best measure of cardiovascular fitness. Two, it is increased with regular training. So if you have one report of somebody's VO2 max, suppose before injury or after injury, and you want to train the person, and then after you want to see whether there is a change or not, that you could see the improvement, and you could also see it in the precise amount. Uh, Lactate threshold also gives a lot of information about the fatigue level. It is second most important parameter to know a person's performance, and it also can be changed with training. And the heart rate values around the lactate thresholds give a lot of information about how the training needs to be modified and everything. So it's important. And as you could see in the graph, the performance is definitely dependent on many other things, but the VO2 max, lactate threshold, and running economy, they are the ones which in the end determine the athlete's performance and the final time. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. So I think we have another round of question answer if we have any. Yes.
Like, so Deepak, can you hear us?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
I think we got a nice amount of time for
Yeah.
Q&A. So the Q&A are both in the chat. So I'm looking at my iPad and trying to answer, and we can do both of it.
So there is one question from my side. Can you please explain the audience, how they can utilize VO2 max for non-sports people, like, normal individuals?
Okay, so when we say there are two types of, when you say non-sports, it could mean somebody with a clinical related condition, or you could refer to somebody who just wants to get healthier and fitter. At the end of the day, like Jenny said, the VO2 max test is the gold standard of your cardiorespiratory fitness. We also know that cardiorespiratory fitness is one of the very important predictors for prevention against heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes. There's been strong correlation between fitness and even longevity. In fact, they found that fitness is much more correlated to a person's longevity than even things like BMI and things of that sort. So there's a lot of, the beauty of doing a test is, I call it as a science and an art. The science is a lot of the scientific aspects of what Jenny just spoke to you about, but you can pick up a lot from your subject, from your client, patient, whatever term you want to use, from the feedback they give you while doing the test. It can also be used as a great training tool, because from all the graphs you get, and we've intentionally not gone into too much of detail of aerobic thresholds or anaerobic threshold, your ventilatory threshold, and all of that. You can also give them a lot of training guidelines as to what you can do to maximize, to increase those various thresholds. Okay? So there's a lot of different reasons that you could use it. You could use it in weight loss related. I don't know whether, I think Jenny mentioned about the RDR, which looks at the various substrates you are burning, whether you're burning fat or whether you're burning carbohydrate. And you can get your basal metabolic rate. You can put an exercise program, and then you can see how that is progressing over time. So all of this you can get.
Yeah.
Okay. Jenny, you want to talk about the shuttle walk test?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, you want to describe it?
Just talk a little bit about. Somebody's asking about the incremental shuttle walk.
Okay. So the incremental shuttle walk test, I think that's favorite amongst all the athletes, and because it doesn't need tool, you just have to have that metronome in your phone or anywhere which is available online as well. And it has a 20-meter long space where a person stands, and there is a metronome which is beeping at particular time. It initially has a longer time period between each beep, so the person has to run from one end of the corridor to the other end before the beep comes, and then again after the next beep they have to come back. So it is kind of an incremental test, because over a period of time the beeps will come sooner and sooner and sooner, so the person will have to run faster and faster, and when they could not complete it 2 or 3 consecutive times, they could not reach on time before the beep comes. That's the time when the test is stopped. And suppose a person has finished 4 cycles, 2 laps, it gives a value. So it has a value of estimated VO2 also, and it has itself, by itself, it gives you a fitness value. I think over a period of time, I think that's most commonly used for children when they are into sports, the young ones.
Okay. The other question was, can you use swimming? I mean, for swimmers, can you do this test? So the answer is yes. Let me give you a little history of this testing. A lot of the early testing was done in Europe, in say Sweden and Scandinavian countries. There, cycling is much more common. So tests done in Europe are usually done on a bicycle ergometer. Tests done in the United States are usually done on a treadmill. In India, we normally use a treadmill. Again, studies have shown that when you test on a treadmill, you get a slightly higher performance because also it's a more natural thing. Everybody walks, everybody runs, but everybody doesn't cycle. So on a professional cyclist, probably the cycle is the best way to do it. And for a swimmer, there is no, I mean, it's hard to test underwater. So you can use a treadmill and that is fine. There's no harm in that.
Question about the age.
Is this test applicable in youth athletes below 18 years old? Yes, I think it is. We just don't have that much of normative data in people below 18, so that you might not get enough. But once an athlete, especially once they're crossing 14, 15, kind of a puberty type age, they're not going to be too different from a young adult. So I think it would be that. I don't think it's necessarily useful for children, but I think a young adult should be fine.
I think we had tested one boxer, 14-year-old.
We tested some tennis players as well. Yeah. Another question was about arteriovenous oxygen difference and cardiac output. Now, those are not things that we can measure on a machine like this. These are clinically arteriovenous oxygen difference is measured by catheters, measuring arteries, and this. While the cardiac output could also be measured using a 2D echo, because cardiac output is essentially stroke volume into heart rate. It's the amount of blood your heart pumps out every minute. And the units are milliliters per minute or liters per minute, and average values are roughly about 5 to 5.5 liters per minute. So the YMCA protocol that I am familiar with is one that's on a cycle ergometer. I haven't used a YMCA protocol ever that I can remember on a treadmill. I've used it on a cycle, and that's fine. You can use it. But like I said, normally when you have the YMCA protocol was more commonly used, if I remember correctly, for a sub-max test, not for a max, and then you extrapolate it to max. Okay. Somebody is asking about a cycle. Are there any special cycles? No. What happens is ideally the cycle or the treadmill should be talking with your VO2 max system. So from a central thing of getting all the data fed in. You could have them disconnected and do a lot of manual work, but that's not ideal. Okay. Jenny is asking you what formula are you using for heart rate max?
We are using the simplest one, 220 minus H.
Another question is, how is blood lactate level measured? You want to answer that?
So we have a machine to measure blood lactate values. It is similar to how we have a glucometer. So you have to just prick a person's finger and you put the blood on the strip, and it finds out the value of lactate. We have done it also for a few patients, a few subjects or athletes while doing the testing. We found it more comfortable doing it on the cycle rather than treadmill, because when they are at a higher speed, to prick and get the blood and put it on the right place is a little difficult.
Okay, somebody was asking about RER. Did you speak about that a little bit?
I had not much.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So RER is the ratio of VCO2, so the amount of carbon dioxide that is been exhaled upon the amount of oxygen that is been consumed, and it usually at rest, it depends on what substrate you are utilizing. Your body is burning at rest. So if you are burning more fat, it would be much lower. If you are burning more carbs, it would be around zero point 0.8. But usually it fluctuates between 0.6 to zero point 0.8. And as somebody starts doing exercise with incremental exercise, these values rise up. And at around the point of anaerobic threshold, so where somebody is about to reach anaerobic threshold, these values reach about 1. And at maximal exercises, it goes up to 1.15. And even in the recovery period, you can see a spike coming in around 1.2. And it depends on the athlete. If they are more trained, they could take up more higher values and they could bear.
Somebody asked, and I think I saw it earlier as well, the difference between VO2 max and VO2 peak. So technically, a VO2 max is set to achieve when you reach a certain peak, and then you see a little plateau. So you need to see a plateau to call it the VO2 max. While VO2 peak is just the highest value that you see. Honestly, these are, if I may say so, just technical differences. From a practical, real-life perspective, I don't think there's that much. Yeah.
How is VO2 max going to help in cardiac rehabilitation?
You answer.
So I would say, sir, you answer.
Okay. So in terms of VO2 max and cardiac rehab, ideally when we give somebody an exercise prescription, all the research that has been done, giving exercise prescription based on VO2 max values initially. Those have then been extrapolated for heart rate values. So typically the graph kind of goes like this, where initially, let's say 50% of your VO2 max will be like 60% of heart rate max, and 60% of VO2 max will be say 70, 75% of heart rate max. And at 100, they both have to converge because 100 is one common point. So when we know the VO2 max of a cardiac patient, we can use it for exercise restriction. We can use it for different things like looking at the lactate threshold levels or anaerobic levels and keeping it below that. And we can also measure it serially to see whether it's improving or not. To be honest, I don't think it's a necessary test for everybody undergoing cardiac rehab. You have the ability, you have the availability, you can do it, but it's not a must. For heart failure patients, it's got a lot more. Okay.
What are the precautions we should be aware with when we are doing tests for the patients with renal failure and patients with malignant history? I think most of the precautions, they remain the same. So first we need to clear out the contraindications about this and any active symptoms if the patient is having at rest before starting the test, then also we should address it. Otherwise, if assuming their fitness levels are on lower side, we should be monitoring their ECGs when we are doing that. Anyway, we monitor the blood pressure and heart rate during the test. And I think we should go more by the symptoms than other parameters, that if they feel something, then we should take.
Yeah, I think a very underestimated tool in exercise science, which costs nothing, it's just one A4 size paper, is your RPE scale, your rating of perceived exertion, okay, which was devised by a Swedish scientist Gunnar Borg in the late 50s, early 60s. In fact, Dr. Borg just died about 3 months ago at the age of 93 or 94 or some ripe old age. And there's a 6 to 20 point scale and there's a 1 to 10 point scale. So all of you on the other end, I'm sure you're familiar with the RPE, rating of perceived exertion scale. If you're not, please look it up. It doesn't matter which scale you use, just use one of them and explain it to your patient. And I think that in any exercise prescription setting, or even while doing a test, you should constantly get feedback from your patient. That comes to the next question. Somebody asks, do you need to do anything different for cardiac patients? You don't need to do anything different in terms of technically carrying out the test, but I think that you need to be alert about signs and symptoms. I think you need to proactively keep asking somebody, how are you? Are you comfortable? Every minute or so, give me, especially if they're wearing a mask, they can't talk, then you say, give me a thumbs up sign. So you have to proactively ask, are you okay? Are you lightheaded during exercise sessions and during a test as well? So I think constantly getting feedback from the patient is a very important aspect which people sometimes take for granted or they ignore. Yes, that's
There is one question in the report you showed. The RER at VT1 was around 0.92. Do you use the slope or RER to determine VT1? For determining VT1, we mostly use the slope method. But at times, if you have query, then we also look at the other graph. But VCO2 by VO2 slope is the most reliable method that has come so far.
okay. So I think we've pretty much covered most of the. There are some questions on cost and how much the unit costs. So Deepak, we'll leave that for you to answer at a later stage. All I'll tell you is very, very expensive. But yes. Is the treadmill different from a regular treadmill? Not really, but ideally the treadmill should be able to talk to the system. We're very lucky we've got HP Cosmos treadmills, and I'm a little bit biased because I think that these are the best treadmills that are there in the world. They're made by a guy called Franz Harder in Germany, and their the stability of their running surface is fantastic. And I've been running only on HP Cosmos myself since 2002 now, so that's the treadmill we use. And it's got this harness setting as well when we are going at a very fast speed.
Somebody's asked, is the one behind the anti-gravity treadmill? Yes, we have the anti-gravity treadmill just after that.
That what you see, this Alter G, that is an anti-gravity treadmill. So well
Good
done.
observation.
Yeah. How safe is it to perform this test on a young male post PTCA? Oh, if the person is asymptomatic and cardiac-wise stable, it's completely safe. Obviously, when you're doing it, I would rather see what we also do out here. We have the unique abilities. We monitor ECG. Typically, for a pure fitness test, one doesn't necessarily monitor ECG. We do it. So we have that added safety net which we use. Okay? Can you throw some light on indirect measures that in most settings, high-end equipment is not available? Like Dr. Jenny said, there are field tests that you can do. For cardiac patients, we do a very simple 6-minute walk test. There are definitely options if you don't have all these available. In high-risk populations such as diabetes and hypertension, submax test has to be performed. Can it be used for VO2 max estimation? The answer is yes, it can be used. But just because somebody's got diabetes or just because somebody's got hypertension does not mean you can't do a max. Okay? Those by themselves are not contraindications. If it's uncontrolled hypertension and it's jumping to 200 plus and out of control, then yes, you may want to stop the test and do a submax. But as a general rule of thumb, neither diabetes nor hypertension is a contraindication to do a max test.
When we should do it in pulmonary rehab. So as Dr. Contractor suggested that there is no specific indication to do VO2 max testing for cardiac or pulmonary rehab. Usually we use 6-minute walk test. But if there is a person who is posted for lung transplant or there are any specific measures that we want to look for, then we should use the VO2 max test.
Somebody is asking about VO2 max predicted from Bruce protocol with that measured during Bruce. Yeah, it is going to be different. One of the reasons, and this is just my guess, I don't know why you may have found a difference in your particular setting, is what Jenny spoke early on, is holding on. You have no idea how much that makes a difference. Most of the tests done all over our country, in hospitals, in health checkup clinics, the person's always holding, okay? And it doesn't make a small difference, it makes a massive difference. So in our own setup, when I want to do the health check, I always insist on not holding. And I usually do about close to 13 minutes without holding. One year I said, let me just hold for the fun of it and see what happens. And I went over 16 minutes and I had not reached RP of 17 or 18, okay? that is 3 full minutes, and 3 minutes, especially at that pace and inclination between minute 13 and 16, is a massive, massive difference. It's not a small difference. So when you're holding on, you're just sort of falsely propelling. And even when it's, clients always tell you, oh, we just touch. But that one touch will then slowly go like this, and the second finger will come out, and the third finger will come out, and soon they'll be like holding on as if they're going to die. So, and holding on for life. So that's what makes the difference. So better to do it otherwise completely holding on or not. There's always, if the person's comfortable, then better to do it without holding on, and that makes a big difference, especially when using estimated formula. Okay. Okay. So, Deepak, can we sort of wrap it up now?
Yeah, I think you have answered most of the questions. I was going through the question section. So thank you very much, Dr. Contractor. I am really very thankful to you that you could take out some time for us, out of your busy schedule. And Dr. Jain, it was fantastic presentation. I really appreciate your effort.
Yeah, Jenny took a lot of trouble in the presentation, and we went through it, and we revamped it, and hopefully it was nice for the.
Yeah. We are getting quite positive feedback from the audience, and
okay.
Very much. And we see you soon for some other webinars.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, all the participants. Thank you very much. And we shall have some more webinars coming soon. Thank you very much.